and there are a lot of double agents involved, and you've got to identify them and solve the crime and solve who's behind it. And then you can come up with one line at the end of the book which says Churchill and Stalin worked together on the Sydney Street siege, and in exchange for that, Joseph Stalin was given the United Nations for removing the Kuomintang army out of China in August 1945, which took him a week. 1 week. 1 week. Joseph Stalin was given the United Nations for 1 week's work in August 1945.
What does that mean, Greg, to say that he was given the United Nations?
Well, it means that the United Nations is posthumous Stalin, which is exactly what it is. It says one thing and does another. The United Nations is absolutely dedicated to mass genocide. Like, they go in after the genocide. They say they can't do anything about it. They slap international war criminals with wet bus tickets and hope that they'll fall over, and that's never happened. The United Nations is a complete waste of time.
So if I was raised to believe that the United Nations was our last best hope for world peace, I was deluded. I was being misinformed, as Humphrey Bogart observed about going to Casablanca for the waters. When he was told there were no waters in Casablanca, he said, I was misinformed.
Well, like, I went to central Turkey, to Konya, seeking the magic carpet, and when I got there, they said, no, it's in China.
well, I hope you at least poked around looking for Noah's Ark while you were there.
Well, I was actually interested in Rumi.
Right, tell me, what is your what is your methodology when you set out to write a book? How do you go about it?
Well, basically, intelligence rings me up and says, take me out to lunch. It's called the Queen's Sausage, where I buy the food and the drink, and they tell the story and I take notes.
Really?
So, I don't get any information out of books. I go on the web and check a few dates and the spellings of names and stuff, but I get virtually no information out of books.
But it's from oral history, as it were, from within the intelligence communities?
Yeah.
Ah, fascinating.
So all of my histories are totally new histories, like gifting the United Nations to Stalin. No one's ever written how the UN was gifted to Stalin, and how the Kuomintang army was the most feared Japanese army at the beginning of World War II, and then they replaced all the excellent soldiers with old men, dissidents, and students, removed all their weapons, and gave them nothing. Actually, they were shaping bamboo into guns, and they were getting truck springs and straightening them out into swords. And Stalin turned up he took 2 months to ship all of his planes and tanks into the area, and their planes outnumbered them 100 to 1. So Stalin took over the Kuomintang army, which was basically now an old people's home without shelter, took over the Kuomintang army in a week. And then Britain and America published that Stalin had the most powerful land army in the world, so they gave him the United Nations for finishing off the war. And the 2IC of the UN now is always a KGB agent. And the current 3IC of the UN, who's in charge of the New World Army, is a KGB agent, and her name is Helen Clark.
So you're telling me that giving the UN to Stalin meant that he was in the position to staff key officials in the organization to ensure that it would act in the interests of the Soviet Union?
Yeah, and the Soviet Union is just a military state and a social testing ground for Israel, for their policies. Like the 1917 revolution in Russia was actually a Jewish revolution. It was a Jewish takeover of Russia.
Do you draw distinctions?
Stalin was a Jew. Stalin was a Jewish cripple.
By the way, how many sources, if you're doing oral history, how many sources do you require before you believe that you have sufficient information to write a book?
Well, you know how you can read a history book and it's like 500 pages and you go, oh, nothing really out of it. There's nothing really concrete in there. What I get is the gist of the story, and then I check it with someone else, and then I check it through a few other sources, and then I write it up and represent it, and they add bits. And when I prompt them with the story again, they add the detail, and then I check the detail, and the process goes round and round and round until I've got, military intelligence history of some aspect, like,
Well,
Hitler was a British agent.
Let's take Hitler was a British agent. How many pages is that book?
560.
And how many pages are there of sources and references and notes?
There'd be 500 footnotes, 13 appendixes, 10 pages of bibliography, and 20 pages of two-column index.
So there are, in your 560-page book, about 100 pages are devoted to notes, references, indices, and appendices? Yeah,
it would be about that, actually. Let me see. 560, appendix 1, 4, there are 120 pages of appendices, bibliography, and references.
Okay, how
plus 40 footnotes, so probably 150 pages of references.
That's a good ratio, Greg.
Yeah.
I mean, I like that. That suggests that what you're doing is certainly not frivolous. How have conventional historians responded to any of your works?
Well, some of them have actually responded favorably. There was a guy who went on radio in England, and he said, look, I'm a professor of such and such, and all of Greg Hallett's books are absolutely spot on. They're actually the truth. And then some radio announcer, a very popular radio announcer in Britain, one of the most popular at the time, he got hold of the book, he ordered it, so I sent him a copy, and instead of mentioning it on a radio, all of a sudden he had a film career.
He had a film career? Meaning
Do you see how it works?
You mean he was interrupted on the radio by phone calls?
He never got to say anything on the radio, rather than say, Hitler was a British agent, here it is, it's a very well written book, and it's very well researched, and it's quite funny in places. He got a film career.
I don't understand the meaning.
He got promoted sideways.
Oh, he got promoted. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. If you don't talk about Hitler was a British agent, we'll give you a film career, and you'll go to Hollywood and walk down the red carpet. And he went, okay.
All right. There's a lot of disinformation out there. There's a lot of suppression of truth. I mean, in the United States, since Bush and Cheney came into office, especially, there's been a mass manipulation of information that's been disseminated through the mass media and television. Have you paid much attention to what Bush and Cheney were doing? Have you formed opinions about them?
Well, Bush was basically the idiot president.
Yeah.
There are even theories that he's
I understand. Believe me, I lived through it.
Yeah. I mean, it was just, it was cringe factor to watch. It was just absolutely shocking. So, we formed the same opinions here that you Americans have of him. He was just an absolute disaster, and he's definitely a warmongering mafia boy. So we can go right into that in detail, but I don't really want to.
I'll just tell you that I think it was in 2008. I gave a talk at a Ron Paul rally, a freedom rally, on the grass in front of the Capitol building. And during my presentation, which has subsequently been published under the heading 9/11 and the Neocon Agenda, I concluded by observing that in Washington today we had a crime syndicate masquerading as an administration.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Like even when I went to Washington, D.C. in 1988, and it was such a rough town then. There were people walking down the street with baseball bats, like, 5 or 6 guys with a baseball bat. And I'm going, well, is there a baseball game on, softball or whatever. I want to go, what's your game? And he goes, no.
You're shitting me. You were walking down the street and gangs with baseball bats were passing you?
Gangs with baseball, this is about 9 o'clock at night, because in Washington, D.C., there's 2 grid zones, A to Z, and then there's another A to Z when you get lost. we were in the A to Z lost zones, the street name's A to Z, so...
Bad.
We got slightly out of we were in the second zone of Washington D.C. and it was rough, man.
Hazardous to your health.
Yeah.
So what about the ones? Go ahead.
I was masquerading as a nurse for a tetraplegic, so we were kind of safe.
What about the historians who take exception to your work? Do they simply say, well, it isn't conventional history and therefore it's wrong?
No, we